So I just got done watching Alone Season 8, Episode 8, I believe it is. And I'm out of the woods. I was doing wilderness courses for the last few weeks. They were awesome. Just an amazing time. So that's been great. But ready for a little break in order to hang out with the family. And so anyway, I got a few minutes to watch the show and give you my thoughts. The first thing, of course, the show starts with is Biko, and Biko is just hanging in there doing the low calorie move, which on a season with this many regulations and this few of opportunities, it's definitely not a bad play. He is, still trying to fish a bunch, which is good. Just amazing how few fish people are catching out there. You'd think a big old lake like that would have plenty of fishing opportunities in it, but as we'll talk about, even Coulter later with the boat is not having much luck. So that's pretty surprising. It's definitely not what you would expect heading out there. But Biko's plugging away. Of course, he has a bad ankle. I'm not sure how much the show is emphasizing that for dramatic purposes, or how much that's really hindering him. If he's truly chilling as much as it seems like, that ankle might not be a huge hindrance. But you never know. It's hard to tell. He is having mice issues, which is a problem, which is also weird because I remember earlier in the season we saw Matt set a deadfall for mice. I don't know if they've since, or I don't know if that was technically not allowed and he did it anyway, in which case I'm surprised they even showed it. But Biko's apparently not doing the same. It is why I built, and the Evenki build, those shelves. So outside of my shelter I had a shelf built basically with skinned poles, and that does keep the mice from getting up on your shelf and eating whatever it is you don't want them to eat, whether it be food or meat or bowstrings. They're ankle braces, but mice is going to town on his stuff. They can really be a problem, especially if you're not allowed to get them. Again, the shelf would be one solution, but also, on my season I had 3 deadfalls set all around my shelter, all baited up, and anything that came in would get smashed. So I never had mice problems. I got 37 mice while I was out there, so there were plenty of mice, but they always came to my baited traps first. Unfortunately, they're not allowed to do it on this season, so there he is with his mallet trying to smash him. Then we get to Clay, who's continuing to have some exciting stuff happening at the he sees a bear out there, and it is true, he talks about it, but it's awesome what you see when you spend lots of time in the woods. You end up seeing things you'd never otherwise get to witness. And in Russia we had a lot of bears. Were a very common part of our existence. They have these big brown bears over there that you run into, or that run into you and try to cause problems. That's why those were on the forefront of my mind when I was on Alone, because I was just expecting an encounter with a bear, and again, kind of underplaying the potentiality of an encounter with a wolverine. So because it was just bears that I always ran into. Those raised food caches are great for bears, and they're and the shelf that I made to keep my meat protected from mice and other little critters is also right out in front of my shelter, so that it also kind of worked as a bait pile for bears, which oddly enough in Canada never came in. But they're coming in now to Biko to Clay and him, and he has a pretty wild encounter. It's definitely not what you want, is that bear finding all your food. I'm surprised when it walked through that first time he didn't sniff out and go check out Clay's meat stash, but as we can see, he came back later. You know, he's probably planning on it to come later. There's at one point in Russia, a bear. I always laugh to myself, like, what if this had happened on the show? How lucky would that be? But a bear came and killed a moose about 100 yards from our hunting cabin, and we went out there, and to make a long story short, the moose was still warm. I could have seen the whole thing happen if I would have woken up when the dog was barking. But anyway, we cut up the moose and brought it back to camp, and you can imagine that bear 3 days later definitely came back. So that's a whole nother story. But here it is now. Clay's having to deal with the bear, and he gets charged. He bear sprays it, honestly, which is probably the best thing that could happen for him, because I don't think that bear is going to come back. If had he not actually sprayed it, I'd imagine that thing would probably harass him the rest of his time out there. So it might have played out just as well as it possibly could have. Definitely a cool experience for him. It's fun to see him like recognize that right away rather than being afraid. And we were back to Theresa. She's tough. She's still out there doing her thing. She actually, she's talking about how she hasn't gotten any food, so she hasn't gotten any food other than some vegetables. But from the pictures, her face doesn't look that gaunt. So she's doing well. You're about to hear the kids screaming probably. But she got her set line up and going. Hopefully that nets something. Then a crazy walks along the beach and finds 2 dead fish. First one just a little tiny white fish, but then the second one is a beauty, and I can't say it actually doesn't look like it's in that bad a condition. So that's a big score. Of course, that's what the bears are doing, is combing that shore for fish that have spawned and then floated up on shore. And so yeah, what an awesome score. And like I said, it doesn't look too bad. It looked like it still had its form. It wasn't all mushy. So she's got some serious food, and it's probably as big a fish as anyone's caught out there. So then we got Coulter. Coulter is interesting. He's the guy that probably had in my mind, probably had the most solid strategy if you're just going by odds out there. Actually, just up in that wilderness course we were doing, just got back, and up from shore you can catch some amazing fish, but as soon as we built a raft and got out in the middle of the lake we were on, it was just bam, 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 fish after fish, and takes it to a whole nother level. Now I would fully expect on Chilko Lake a boat to be your safest bet, especially with as many game regulations as they have. But it's crazy to see that not panning out for Coulter. He's just not catching that many fish, even off his boat. So maybe that's a location thing. He could be in those cloudy glacial waters and not just having a lot of fish, or I don't know, or it's not a great lake for fishing. But for whatever reason, his boat's not panning out. Yeah, it just seems like a horribly unproductive lake. I haven't seen anyone catch much. And, we've seen multiple different strategies. Nate's pier, everybody's fishing offshore. Clay's got the rod. And, he said he hadn't caught a fish in 30 days. That's insane. Anyway, tough fishing out there, even with Coulter and his boat. But I'm hoping he starts to catch some fish. Hoping the net will help net him some food. He's talking about crapping in his living room. I had to do that once when I chopped my knee with an axe when I was in Russia. Still learning how to use an axe. Anyway, I chopped it once, really cut some tendons in there, bad injury. I also had surgery on my left knee prior, so neither of my legs could really function, and I had to lay in the teepee for several days, and I know what he's talking about. And then we get to Rose, and yeah, Rose has a tough time with her feet getting cold. She doesn't look too bad, but she's definitely feeling the effects strongly of the starvation. You only see certain things that each contestant does. What we've seen the most from her is trapping, which was is cool to see, but it's again not very productive there. So see her black out, and they take that really seriously. If you don't check in when you're supposed to check in, that might have weighed into why they decided to pull her. They take that really seriously. So the fact that she missed a check-in, that her toes are always cold. I will say, I can't tell what boots she has, but -50 is not as warm as you might think. The boots I had on alone were Baffin boots. They were -180, I think it said, and even they got cold. But it's not necessarily the boot, it's the conditions, because it's really difficult in those conditions to get your boots completely dry. It's not like you can come home, pull the inserts out, lay them on a radiator, and dry them completely out. You know, you're using hot rocks and things like that, and if they're not completely dry, that R value tanks. Even on my -180 boots, you know, they have that space material in it, so they're not actually that breathable. And yeah, I'd be out there weaving my net with my bare hands. You know, it's probably only 20 degrees out, not that cold, and my feet would be freezing. It was very frustrating, and especially with Rose not having a fire in her shelter, there's no good place for her to be able to sit back and warm her feet while also drying her boots. You know, that was, for me, it was a 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening process. After the night, I would lay my socks out, dry them thoroughly. I had 2 big pairs of wool socks. Get both my socks dried out after they collected humidity from the night, put them on, put my boots on, head out. Anytime my feet got cold at all, I would come back in, dry my boots again, dry my socks again. And then at night, it was a whole nother operation of getting rocks hot, throwing them into all my socks, drying my socks out completely before bed, and drying those inserts of my boots out, which is difficult. It's difficult even with a fire in your shelter. So having to do that all, I imagine she probably wasn't getting them fully dry, in which case they will just always be cold. But you know, she's tough, and they made the call to pull her out, and you know, it's probably the best call. So you know, out there you just see the prospects aren't great for long-term survival, so they might have calculated that too, saw the writing on the wall and be like, you know, why have her lose her toes or have permanent damage when you don't need to? So probably the right call. And here we go into episode 9 with 4 people left. The Biko, extra weight, Clay with his deer, Coulter with his boat, and Theresa just being tough and trying to make something happen. Apparently a good metabolism, so somebody's shooting. Anyway, thanks for watching again, and cheers. See you next week.